Hello, welcome back to Catalyzing Coherence. Today we are here with Garrett Lisi. I'm really excited for today's episode. I've been a huge fan of yours since at least 2007 when you first published your exceedingly simple,
exceptionally
simple theory of everything. You are a theoretical physicist. You are a surfer. You are a beekeeper, a general outdoorsman. What aren't you?
I'm a terrible farmer. I never intended to be a farmer, but it turns out just for quality of life reasons, if you're living on Maui long enough, you end up becoming a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
It's just from life enjoyment maximization and getting the best produce and best food. You always end up farming if you have a plot of land. It's really funny because everything grows there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But anyway, thanks for having me on the show.
For sure. Yeah. We're really happy to have you here. So perhaps for the people in our audience who aren't quite as familiar with the work that you've been doing in theoretical physics, you're creating a theory of everything, or some of the work that you're doing can be used to underlie this theory of everything or guide that physical research, right?
Well,
Maybe tell people about that.
I didn't start out looking for a theory of everything because that would be kind of nuts. And I'm not that nuts.
Okay.
I started out trying to figure out the answer to a question that was really bothering me when I was a graduate student in physics. And that question was, we have this wonderful description of gravity as curving spacetime. Mm-hmm. So matter curves spacetime, and the curvature of spacetime controls how massive bodies move through it, how all bodies move through it. And that's a very geometric picture. We can describe it with differential geometry and with smooth manifolds and flows on surfaces and things that are very geometric. But when you go into particle physics and you want to describe, okay, well, how does an electron interact and how does that move and how does that interact gravitationally? It's freaking ugly, right? You have matrices that transform a certain way under rotations. It's not geometric in the same way that the description of gravity is geometric, and that really bothered me. I figured if the universe is just one thing, and this geometric description of gravity is correct, as it must be, then there must also be a geometric description of electrons and other matter particles. There just has to be one, and the one we have just doesn't seem intuitively geometric in the same way that the description of gravity is. So I got my PhD, and I really wanted to answer this question, and nobody else even thought it was a problem. And there was this other group in string theory going out in another direction. They were sort of trying to do that, trying to describe particles geometrically, but they were trying to describe them in vibrating strings. And I thought that was sort of a artificial contrivance that they had taken a wrong turn that way. And I wanted a more direct geometric description of elementary particles. So I moved to Maui. I had gotten lucky with some of my investments, and I was able just to support myself on my investment income. Moved to Maui, became a surf bum, and worked on physics on my own. And after banging my head against the problem for almost a decade, I managed to find finally an answer to that question. What is this geometric description of elementary particles? And it turns out that there are these very beautiful, intricately intertwined and complex mathematical structures called Lie groups. And the structure of some of these Lie groups, which are exceptional cases among Lie groups, turn out to correspond to exactly the properties of electrons and other elementary matter particles, also intertwined with gravity and all the other forces. And it was just a fantastic thing to find.
Light bulb moment.
Yeah. And so when I found that, since they're exceptional in structures in mathematics, that's where I came up with the fun name of exceptionally simple theory of everything, because they're exceptionally simple Lie groups.
What does that mean exactly, to be an exceptional Lie group?
Well, there are different Lie groups that correspond to symmetries of different things. So you can have a symmetry of space, and that gives you a Lie group corresponding to rotations. So, for example, in 3 dimensions of space, you can rotate around 3 different axes. So in 3 different planes. And so that's a 3-dimensional Lie group, right? And if you consider that we're in 4-dimensional space-time, right, then this has 6 dimensions, because as well as the 3 dimensions of space, you can also move in 3 directions.
Okay.
Right? So and that as a combined Lie group, that's a 6-dimensional Lie group. Okay? And there are different stacks for different dimensions of Lie groups. So there are Lie groups for rotations in space. And then there's another set of Lie groups for rotation in complex space. They can go up to arbitrarily high dimensions. And then there are these different infinite collections.
Yeah, and when you say complex space, is that with complex numbers?
Yes, that's right. And then, other than these towers of Lie groups, there are 5 out of nowhere exceptional cases that don't seem to be the symmetry of anything but themselves, really. But mathematically, if you work out the classification of all different possible Lie groups, they stand out as 5 different weird special things. And so that's why they're called exceptional Lie groups, is because they stand out as different. They're not part of any other series. And so there are these 5 exceptional Lie groups, G2, F4, E6, E7, and E8, with E8 being the largest and most complicated. And so that's a 248-dimensional Lie group. And it's fundamentally, it's not different than the 3-dimensional group of rotations of space. So it's the same that way, and its structure is the same, the way you can rotate something in one axis, then rotate it along another axis. And that's the same as a rotation along the third axis. All right, so these rotations interact. So 2 interactions will give a third. And this is the way it works in all Lie groups. So the same thing in E8, if you have a different elementary particle corresponding to each different direction, right, of this 248-dimensional Lie group, then when you have rotations along those directions in this Lie group, that's 2 particles interacting to give a third.
Okay.
And you can, in order to keep track, I mean, a 248-dimensional Lie group is a very complicated thing to describe.
It's hard to just hold in the head.
All right? But mathematicians are freaking smart, and they figured out a way to describe this with diagrams. And the way they do it is they just count up the number of twists that the different dimensions have around each other.
Okay.
Right? So you literally count 1, 2, 3 twists as you go around one direction. So they pick out 8 perpendicular circles inside this 248-dimensional shape, and they count the number of twists of the other 240 circles around that 8.
Okay.
And you get a different number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, around each of the different 8 circles for each of the other 240 circles. And it just so happens that there's a match between the electric charges, weak charges, strong charges, and spin charges of the known elementary particles and the twist that these circles make inside this
the symmetry between the geometric object and the observational reality just kind of falls out of that.
There's a direct correspondence between our known elementary particles that we see in our physical universe and this beautiful geometric object.
It's mind-blowing.
Astounding.
Yeah, it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So, and what do you think the implications of that are? That there's this deep symmetry that falls out of such a complex structure in this mathematical object, and yet it corresponds to high energy physics. What does that mean to you?
Well, you said something at the beginning where you said that I had created this this mathematical description, and I strongly believe that I didn't create it; I discovered it. I don't think math is created so much as discovered.
So more the Platonic interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think mathematics has sort of its own ideal existence, and that if there's some alien civilization in some distant galaxy that's sufficiently advanced to develop mathematics, they're going to find Lie groups. Any advanced mathematician is going to hit this set of mathematical structures. And they're going to have the same classification, and they're going to find the same 5 exceptional cases, with E8 being the largest one. They won't call it E8; they might call it, but it's going to be the same structure.
Yeah.
And so I think this mathematics is discovered, and it's just amazing to me that there's a correspondence between what's possibly the most beautiful mathematical structure and the physical properties of our universe. So that's just fantastic. And so there's nothing more philosophically satisfying to me than to explore this relationship and see if I can flesh it out and find its problems, because it does have problems. It's not an absolutely perfect match, at least as far as I can tell.
And so those problems are those related to the unification of the standard theory at the moment?
Yeah, so even matching the current standard model. So if you lay out all the particles, you have electrons, up and down quarks, and neutrinos, and this makes up pretty much all the matter we see. All the matter we interact with, they're made of up and down quarks and electrons and photons and the binding weak force and strong force. And if you map out all the charges of all these different particles along each of these different axes, and they all correspond to their twists in this geometric object, then there's a direct match between our particles and this object. However, in particle accelerators, you can go and you can collide particles at higher energies, And you can create particles that we don't see in normal matter, right? With enough energy, coming together in one place, you can briefly pop into existence these other more massive particles. And what we see is that the electron has partners with higher masses, but the exact same charges. So the electron has a heavier partner called a muon, and a heavier partner still called a tau. And you might say, well, that's weird. What about the other particles?
And those partners only fall out when you add energy that then allows them to have that higher density.
That's right. So
higher
normally
mass.
you wouldn't see it because you kick an electron up to this higher energy.
Yeah, because it's only stable as an electron with the energy that it has, like in our...
Right. The electron's the lightest version.
Yeah.
So if you have one of these heavier particles, it will decay and jump down to a muon and then down to an electron. And it'll emit neutrinos as it goes. Okay, but it'll jump back down to an electron almost immediately, matter of seconds or less. So these, depending on how fast it's going, and in which frame. So and it turns out, well, that's a weird thing. What about the other particles? Every known matter particle has two higher mass partners. So this is called the three generations of elementary particles. And nobody really knows why there are these three copies of every particle. And this is only the case for the matter particles, not for the force particles. And E8 has this mathematical structure, has this triality symmetry in it that'll let you relate a bunch of particles. But I've been trying for years and determined I don't think it can work to describe the generations correctly, at least not in a way that I've been able to find that makes sense.
What do you mean by generations? In that regard?
So the different generations are you need three different copies with the same charges. So you need to be able, from this 8 dimensions, and the charges have, there's electric charge, there's weak charge, there are two strong charges called color, and there's gravitational charge, which is a spin, and you can argue for 6 types of charge total. And you have in this E8 Lie group, you have 8 different kinds of charge, so you can project down to the 6. And you need, for the matter particles, there's enough particles in E8 to project down to the particles, to the known particles, but there doesn't seem to be a way to successfully project down to get exactly 3 copies, with all of those copies having the same 6 sets of charges for each one, which is what you need to match reality. So there might be some way to do it I haven't thought of yet, but I've been trying a while and it hasn't worked yet.
Okay. And so I guess there's 2 things there. So I guess first, the more abstract of the 2, the picture that it seems like you're painting for me, or that's kind of popping into my head, is a high-dimensional, high-energy reality beyond ours that settles into a more stable, lower-energy, lower-dimensional reality for some reason. And right. I think what you've talked about in the past is that's a function of like a symmetry breakage that
is. So there's some. So if this picture is correct, there's some wonderfully intricate and perfectly symmetric high-dimensional geometric object, and somehow its symmetry is shifted such that some directions in that object are special, and those would be the Higgs background directions.
Yeah,
and that.
It's kind of like in your TED talk when you took the arrow and put it on its end and like let it fall, and then that's kind of that arbitrary direction of time, and then everything kind of follows that direction.
That's right. So suddenly you had this perfect symmetry where everything's the same in all directions, but then an arrow fell and that picks out a direction. Now that direction's special, and everything that interacts with that particle takes on a mass as a result of that direction becoming special. Okay, and that's how all particles are thought to get their mass. Otherwise, everything would be massless and moving at the speed of light.
It's kind of reminding me of like the Heideggerian concept of like thrownness.
Yeah, you're always thrown into the moment, and the movement of particles is there's this way through this geometric pattern.
There's like a given that everything, we don't necessarily, we only have in our own domain of action as humans, we only have this limited control over, where we were placed, our starting position, our own trajectory, so to speak, the inertia behind us. And it seems like what you're saying is there's kind of like same type of thrownness to the universe, where it's like, if there happened to be a symmetry breakage in any arbitrary direction from this E8 Lie group, everything just flowed from that in that direction. And if you were in that system, you wouldn't necessarily know. To you, it wouldn't look like it was an arbitrary choice. It would just look like time.
Right.
Or that's how we experience it.
Yeah. There's a similar Japanese idea of the imperfection in a pice of artwork that makes it special.
Yeah.
Because if you have something that's perfect, it's not perfect. It needs an imperfection to be perfect.
Yeah.
So the Higgs field is an imperfection that appears in a perfect mathematical structure that then everything else interacts with and
can you elaborate on that? So the Higgs field being the field in which mass actually becomes, right? That all these particles move through. We'll let you actually explain that. In terms of
discovered in 2012, right?
Yeah. Well, the particle corresponding to this Higgs field and Higgs mechanism was discovered in 2012
at the LHC,
and it was such a successful theory that it was a good bet that it was going to be found, but we didn't know exactly what mass it would be found at. So that was really good to find out. But it's a part of many theories, including the C8 theory, to have this Higgs field in it, because it provides a mechanism for the symmetry breaking to happen. So the idea is that you have it the same in all directions, but because of the way the potential is set up, because of the way the laws of motion are for the geometry, it arbitrarily falls down to a lower energy state. But along some direction, and that direction is random. It's arbitrary, but it picks one out.
Well, is it random? Like, is there? Can you what do you mean by that?
It means it.
There's nothing special to nature, to the evolution of the cosmos.
There appears to be a directionality of time, but not of anything else. So the universe is isotropic, so it's the same in all three directions as far as we can tell. And similarly, there's a similar isotropy within the rest of the Lie group. Right? So these other directions aren't special either. Okay? But if you start with a certain set of equations of motion to describe what the system does, you can set it up so that, say, if you... what's a good way to describe this? The way it's usually described is with a sombrero. So if you have a sombrero and you let a marble go from the top, okay, it's not going to stay at the top. It's going to fall down into the basin of the hat.
Yeah.
But you don't know where in the basin it's going to matter.
Or it's like in the mall where you have those little coin things where you can basically roll the coin and it'll roll all the way down.
Well, that way that rolls into the center, which is then a specific spot that's picked out.
But isn't there that?
But then it drops into something underneath and you wouldn't know where in the heck it would land.
But the way the Higgs works is the marble rolls down into the basin of the hat, and then it's at one spot.
Okay.
And all the other spots are the same, except now you actually have the marble here. So that's a one specific location being picked out as special. And this is the same way the Higgs background works. Is one direction gets picked out as special. And then once that happens, that you no longer have a symmetry for your whole system. The symmetry's been broken.
Yeah.
It's no longer...
you've moved from potential, infinite potential to a specific actuality, in a sense.
Yeah, it picked out a specific actuality, and now that's the one we're in.
I like that last point.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Lee Smollen's work? Quantum gravity. What is it? Yeah,
a bunch of it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Lee's a great guy.
So one of the things that I'm going to try to paraphrase, and you can correct me or add. So one of my interpretations of his sort of cosmological view is that the universe is a black hole propagating machine of sorts.
That was a great idea of his. So that was the idea of cosmological natural selection.
Yeah.
Which is our universe has evolved such that, the same way that Darwin's theory of evolution is that creatures that propagate the most are the ones that survive and persist and propagate more. Right? So nature selects for the ability to reproduce. So his idea was that our universe has been selected in the same way by being created in a black hole, and that our universe has evolved to create many black holes. Yeah. And that each one of those spawns another universe, and so
the fractal evolution of universes through black holes.
This series of natural selection where the universes get selected that are better at creating black holes.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of that? I think it has an interesting flow to it.
It does, and I really, I really like the theory of evolution. So I'm kind of tickled by this idea of cosmic evolution.
Yeah.
There are a couple things about it which is kind of weird, which is it is oddly coincidental that some of the parameters of our universe appear consistent with us being inside a black hole. That's a little bit disturbing. But it's not. It doesn't seem to entirely make sense. Also, when you talk about other universes branching out, there's not a good way to test it. So whether that idea is right or wrong, we're only in this universe.
Because there's the event horizon there, right?
It's not the event horizon. They're not causally connected at all.
Okay, so it's just completely detached. You couldn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if a universe is a black hole that's branched out from another bunch of universes, they will never again be in contact, and there's no influence of one on the other.
Yeah.
And in science, if something doesn't have an effect on anything in your environment, it doesn't exist.
But I bet there is an influence.
Well, I mean, people have gone actually and looked for it in the cosmic microwave background. Yeah. They've looked for domain walls and things bouncing off one another and any sort of influence like that, and it hasn't been seen.
Because I guess we do know. I guess the reason I was in my head, it was this notion of the event horizon, and then also like Hawking radiation comes back out of them.
That's on the exterior of a black hole.
On the exterior of the black hole. So there's it seems like that's some sort of interaction happening with whatever's on the other side. So there's like a limitation at the event horizon, and you don't really see into it. But then there's something coming out of it. Like what?
Right. Well,
what do you make of that?
That's a big question in physics right now. Does Hawking radiation carry information out of a black hole? And we don't know the answer to that one currently. Because in order to answer that, you really need to have a good theory of quantum gravity, and we don't.
Do you have any open bets on that?
I don't. I mean, my guess is that the evolution is consistent with quantum field theory, and my I'm just speculating along with a bunch of other people. I think that when matter falls into a black hole, it's gravitationally excited in such a way that it emits the Hawking radiation, other gravitational radiation, and a lot of that information is coming out in gravitational radiation. So that when a black hole finally evaporates and goes poof, it doesn't delete all the information from the universe that was lost when things fell into it, but rather that information that was in the stuff that fell into it. That information left and was carried out by the radiation when it fell in.
You say gravitational radiation.
But what if that goes into a new universe, that information?
Well, that's the thing is you can cook up models where new universes are created in black holes, but as far as we know from known general relativity and known properties of matter, that doesn't happen. So to have a whole lot of fun, like creating wormholes and warp drives and all this stuff, you need matter with a negative energy density. And as far as we know, that does not exist.
Well, what about dark matter, dark energy? How does...
Nope, dark energy still attracts, or dark matter still attracts. Dark energy does create an expansion, but dark energy doesn't appear to be made out of matter. Dark energy is probably just a constant throughout the universe called the cosmological constant that drives the expansion.
Governing the rate of the expansion.
Isn't it something like 93% of the known universe? We don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big mystery. But the thing is our picture of particle physics and existing matter, it appears to be a close to complete picture. Because if you have 3 copies of everything, it's not like you have 3 copies of everything except this that you have one of. It's like you have 3 copies of all the matter, and so that gets a feel of completeness to it.
It's an interesting contradiction, or at least juxtaposition, to simultaneously not know anything about so much of the energy and mass in the universe, yet have this idea that it's a mostly complete model. I think that's maybe like people have a little bit of that's where a lot of confusion comes from in terms of, we don't know anything because we don't know what this 95% of the universe is. And you're not taking that position at all. Like you're on the other side where you're saying, we actually do know most of what there is to know about this structure.
I think information wise, I think we know, 90%, but I think what we don't know is a couple of more matter particles, like maybe they're sterile neutrinos, that have a lot of mass. So even though there are a couple of them, they're so numerous that they make up that 80% of matter in the universe.
So CERN is about to be revamping itself. When do you know what? Like how? Where are you following that? I
don't know their timeline. Okay, but yeah, they are boosting up to a higher energy.
And is that what they're hoping to find? What are they hoping to find in this next run?
At this point, they're kind of desperate to find anything at this point if they want their funding to continue, right? Yeah. Because this is the challenge. I mean, the Large Hadron Collider was built really as an exploration machine. So it's really built to explore the higher energy frontier and just find what particles we might have. And they ramped it up, and they found the Higgs boson in 2012, and that was great. But that was pretty much expected. So the Higgs boson was expected since the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? And since the 60s, string theorists have, all string models are superstring models. Okay? And in order to have a consistent and natural description of the Higgs boson and its mass, these string and supersymmetric models require the existence of superparticles.
And that's in the 11-dimensional space.
Well, it's you can have it in various dimensions.
Okay.
But if those superparticles are going to contribute in a way naturally to the mass of the Higgs, they need to have been seen, and they haven't been seen.
Yeah.
So they were hoping at the LHC to see superparticles, and superparticles are like so every matter particle would have a super partner. So there would be an electron, there would be a more massive selectron, right? And every quark would have a squark, right? And
it's fun grammatically.
Yeah. So there would be this whole other copy, this whole other zoo of the super partners of the known particles, and we haven't seen a one.
Yeah, that was the bet that you won in 2015.
So string theorists and many other high energy particle physics really thought these superparticles would be seen. And that structure doesn't come out as naturally in the mathematics I was working with. And I'm kind of a weirdo. I was out working on different theoretical models, and supersymmetry just wasn't natural in them. I found a symmetry emerging describing the matter particles in a different way.
Yeah.
And so supersymmetry wasn't as natural, so I made a bet against it. And superparticles weren't seen, so I won that bet. Yeah.
So what's that like in terms of your divergence from that community of string theorists and forging this alternative path, having early success and popularity, but then there's been somewhat of like a backlash of people trying to attack, that early, I guess what you said, I read a Quora post of yours where you're like, people basically hyped it too much early.
Yeah.
But then, you need this time to actually kind of build the complete model around it. And, but you're doing that by yourself out in Maui, and there's maybe some community that's being built around that. I guess Clee Irwin's leading the quantum gravity research team, and they're on a parallel course but not the same course. Like, what's this all been like for you to kind of make your own path into the physics world?
It's been a really weird ride. So the weirdest thing about this is that the physics models I'm working with are actually unusually conservative. They're a continuation of the unified models that were put together in the 70s and 80s for particle physics before string theory came along and sort of took over the area. So when I came in and I showed, hey, with an extension of these unified models that includes gravity, you get a model that then embeds in these exceptional Lie groups describing everything. And this embedding was straightforward and mathematical, and I couldn't get these other two generations, but they're space form. And then I got a lot of attention for this, and the string theorists went crazy because here's this guy who's coming out of nowhere saying all our work is useless. It was a wrong turn.
Yeah.
And our livelihoods and fundings all depends on this. But look, he doesn't have everything right. So let's just point out the things that he doesn't have right, which doesn't match, and say it's totally wrong. The thing is, it wasn't totally wrong. There's a really startling match, but not everything works right. But in some direction that might be made to work. The universe might be, choosing to do something really funny that I just haven't figured out yet. But the match is good. But anyway, because I got so much attention when I first came out to the theory, I also got shot down just as hard. But I got shot down for the reasons that I put in the original paper describing what was wrong, what were the things that didn't work quite right. So it was really funny. But if you're a working scientist and a new theory comes along, the thing you really want is you want to not have to learn that new theory. Because that would be work. And people are lazy. And people want to keep doing what they're already working on.
Sure.
Right. So
it's hard to admit as well if you've made a wrong turn.
It's like that directionality we find in the field itself.
So a mathematician, physicist came out and published a paper saying this theory can't possibly work. And it was, and they used the reasons that I had put forth in my own paper, but in the paper I published, it was not that it can't work. It's like these are the problems with it, and these are a couple possible ways to address that and get it to work. but they just use their own methods and claim that it can't possibly work, and people just point to that and say, no, it can't work. They proved it.
Yeah.
So it's
just kind of as a motivated reasoning is what you're saying, right? Like people don't want to learn this new theory. People want to continue with their grants. They don't want to reevaluate.
And it's
the
easier to say it's wrong than to try to say like, oh, could this be right?
Yeah, exactly. So from my position, I'm like, wow, this whole playground's mine.
Yeah, you get to go surfing in the morning and then have the whole playground of physics to yourself in the afternoon.
My time pressure's off. But there have been a few people working along very similar directions that I've been in contact with. Clee Irwin's kind of an unusual case because he doesn't have a strong background in physics. He's sort of brought himself up by the bootstraps in the past 5 years or so.
We're all about autodidacts here, so
yeah. But in physics, I had 13 years of college. I put in my time to learn all the solid foundation of physics that you really need to understand how all the interaction of pieces of physics work together as a picture. And if you come in even throwing yourself into it for 5 years into a specialized direction, you're still not going to see the thing that means your theory isn't matching reality.
Well, it's like it's like simultaneously the most complex and abstract space there is.
Yeah, it really is.
They featured you on one of they've done like a video series, the quantum gravity research.
Yeah, Hacking Reality, I think was the episode.
Yeah, that one was fun.
It was a fun episode, but all of them were quite interesting.
Yeah, they're quite well made.
Yeah. One of the things that was super interesting, I think it was the first one about the nature of time being this feedback loop of past and future.
The retrocausality,
yeah,
right?
The retrocausality. How does that map at all to the E8?
It depends on how you do the mapping. So personally, I'm going to upset so many people if I say this. So I do have friends who are working on how to sensibly describe quantum mechanics. And one of the ways you can sensibly describe quantum mechanics is if you allow the future to come back and affect the past. Okay?
It's kind of like a backwards resonance of sorts.
Yeah. So you would then have waves traveling backwards in time as well as forwards in time.
Yeah.
And that would clear up a lot of problems in quantum mechanics, where there seems to be this this strange collapse of the quantum wave function into one state. Okay. And this happens even across vast distances. So it's like, how do you get that to happen? Well, if you go back, if there's another wave that goes back and adjusts things so that collapse happens right there, then you can make sense of that mathematically. However, our best understanding of quantum field theory and general relativity do not allow for that sort of backwards propagation and effect. So it can't be consistent with that theory. And I personally don't think there's retrocausality, although it's an interesting model.
Are there falsifiable predictions associated with that?
Unfortunately, you can't distinguish. It's sort of another radical interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Okay.
Right.
And what we know is quantum mechanics is right, but there's not a good way to distinguish between different ways of interpreting that mathematics, because that's more of a philosophical endeavor. So we have this mathematical description that's very consistent. It describes how things evolve.
Yeah.
And we can impose it on any system, and they get a quantum description of that system. Okay, and this appears to be our universe appears to be quantum in this way. But now we're left to interpret what this math is saying.
Right.
And the simplest interpretation of the math is that our universe is branching out into all these different possibilities.
Yeah.
And when we make a measurement, we find ourselves to be making a measurement in one of these possibilities.
Yeah.
But there's
Not that there's actually a collapse.
That's right, because quantum mechanically, what's happening is you're just becoming correlated. It's like you measure something, and the measurement comes back 3. Okay? But quantum mechanically, there's another you over here making the same measurement, but they read a 2. Right? And there's another one that read a 5.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So at that point, when that measurement was made, so before that measurement was made, there was a you and just one of you. But when you made the measurement, you have this branching.
Yeah.
So now there are a bunch of yous, and they no longer interact with one another.
Yeah.
Because you're too big.
So if that's happening, are you saying that that's happening all the time in this interpretation? And it's just a super infinite explosion of realities at all times?
Super infinite exploding tree of possibilities.
Yes.
Constantly, always, with no convergence, like constantly divergent.
And there's nothing...
Like a coral as well.
Yeah, like branching coral. And there's nothing other than purely random chance. Which one this you is experiencing.
Okay.
All right. However, that's a pretty radical way of describing it. In order to describe it that way, you have to admit the existence of this infinite number of other copies of you branching at every moment.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. And we're used to thinking of our world as it being a solid, persistent, continuous, evolving thing.
Yeah.
It's very solid.
Yeah.
But that's not the way quantum mechanics describes the universe. Quantum mechanics describes it as this branching wave function of possibilities unfolding. And if you believe the math, that's the way you have to think about it. It's really bizarre.
What do you think of like many worlds interpretation?
Yeah, that is the many worlds
interpretation.
interpretation.
So that's how you, well, so like someone like Max Tegmark would say in the many worlds interpretation, there's an infinite number of himself, Max Tegmark, moving through these many different worlds. Do you find like that? Can we just meditate on that for a moment? What are your thoughts on that as the mode of reality, of existence, of being?
Well, if you actually wrap your head around that and try to live with that scenario actually being the one that you're living in, what's that mean for your choices?
They're big. It means your choices are everything.
Yeah.
As Camus said, life is the sum of your choices.
It is. And what do your choices do? Your choices affect what can happen.
Yeah.
What different possibilities is going to happen to your future self?
Yes.
Now there are two ways you can react to that. The two ways are, well, if I have a million different me's branching out from this decision, and according to this decision I make, if I think about what's really going to happen, about 40% of those me's will be unhappier and 60% will be happier. Mm-hmm. Okay, then I'll go ahead and make that decision because it's more likely more of my me's will be happy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you make that decision, that's the way you decide things now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the mind is almost like this like virtual kind of simulation engine to like create a bunch of hypothetical U's and then decide which of, probabilistically, which of those you want to die off, and which of those you actually want to survive into the kind of propagating
That's
future.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So if you think that way, it turns out, that's the way I think now. I go by likelihood. I don't call it the probability of different me's being happy.
Yeah.
According to the distribution of all the happiness and unhappiness that I'll experience in the future. I just think about it increases the likelihood of me being happy. Mm-hmm. So I think Bayesian inference and Bayesian inference talking about the likelihood of outcome is different than the frequentist description, which is how many of good and bad outcomes you'll get. I think Bayesian inference is frequentist inference with a quantum point of view.
Yes. I sometimes consider myself a Bayesian is how I view my existential ontology.
A Bayesian is a perfectly reasonable way for a quantum frequentist to think.
It's just exhausting, constantly updating one's priors.
Yeah. Now that's
the flow. That's the Tao.
There is a dark possibility, which is if you want to make $1 million, right? You go out and pay $1 for a lottery ticket, and if you don't win, you shoot yourself.
Yeah, you mean you start testing
one of you will have won. So the only living one.
And you're just
the only one who will experience existence is the living one who made the $1 million.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
So that would seem like to run counter to more of like the adaptive pragmatist or evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, I know. And then with paragliding and some of the surfing I've done, there are a lot of dead me's.
Yeah. Maybe so. That's an interesting pivot, perhaps. How did you get into surfing? Like, what is the balance? You're really into balance in your life as well. That'd be an interesting thing to talk about.
But I think it's important because if you just spend your time doing nothing but working on any technical problem, you're going to drive yourself nuts. Mm-hmm. Your vision will go myopic. You'll lose your vision. You'll lose your relationships. You'll lose everything, and you'll just be obsessed on this problem, especially if it's a hard problem. And if you've chosen a hard problem, you might not be able to solve it. In fact, you're likely not to solve it. And that will just be so psychologically unhealthy for you as a human being, it will wreck your life. Mm-hmm. So if you want to do something hard, make the rest of your life awesome. Okay? Have good relationships, have good friendships, do stuff outside for fun, go play in a pretty environment, have the best freaking life you can outside of this hard problem you're trying to solve. That's the only way to keep from going nuts. Mm-hmm. If you say, oh no, that other stuff takes up too much of my time, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
As human beings, we need to have balance. We need to be psychologically healthy and happy, and then we can tackle hard problems that are frustrating, that aren't easy.
Yeah, it's like kind of it's tapping into the potential of your being along these many dimensions, right? Like when you're surfing, you're engaging, you're fully engaging your mind and your being in your brain, but just in a completely different paradigm than when you're in the land of abstraction. Like, you're very much in the land of, dealing with nature's visceral reality and trying to adapt to it on very quick timescales.
Yeah.
Like,
Surfing
what do I
is
do in this way?
the most sensorily rich, immersive experience I know of on the planet. It's just a fantastic experience when the conditions are right.
Yeah. It can be amazing. Or like I started learning, and I think I'm still recovering a little bit from a PTSD moment.
Getting tumbled.
Like I was taken. A friend of mine took me to Fort Point, probably a little too early for me, and I ended up like literally almost getting bashed against the rocks. And I haven't surfed again since, but I need to get back on that.
Yeah, when you're surfing, you're definitely in nature. It's like it doesn't matter if there's like a Tesla parked next to a high tech apartment building right there, and with the Whole Foods next door. If you paddle out 100 yards in a big surf break, that could be 100 miles away. You're in hard, no mercy natural existence where a shark might bite you, a wave might bash you into the reef or rocks. It's the boundary is that hard. It's still wilderness out there. It's great.
It's good to be reminded of that, right? And we're so insulated from those elements of our being that getting back in touch with that, it helps a lot. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I founded the Pacific Science Institute. Is I wanted to give scientists a beautiful environment to go out and enjoy, so that then they could come back and tackle hard problems.
Lovely.
And also, it's just science has given so much to the world. I don't think scientists are sufficiently compensated for their contributions to society, unless they capitalize on their creations, in which case they can be quite lucrative. But most of these things are so abstract, and mathematics, theoretical physics, and all these pursuits are so abstract, they're not likely to be easily monetized. So I really think scientists should be better supported. And of course, I'm very biased, being a scientist. but I wanted to make my own effort to have a place in Maui where scientists can come and hang out and work on their stuff and really enjoy the island. And sort of reward them for the work they're doing, and also inspire them so they can go back and do it.
Yeah, that's important for more than just quality of life, because the actual work that's done, if it's coming from a place of need and scarcity and like, oh, there's limited resources, and you actually end up forcing results. Whereas if you're like chilling out on Maui and you're hanging out with your friends and you're like living a good life and you're just like naturally curious about the nature of the world, and it's like fun to have these conversations. I mean,
it's like the fundamental dynamic of the publish or perish dynamic, right? Where it's like everybody kind of like reaching for as many scraps as possible around the table.
Yeah, we have a lot of cross motivations even in academia. And I say we, even though I'm working outside of academia. I'm still sort of part of it, but not really.
I love how you framed the PSI as like a science hostel.
That's
which is cool.
Well, I mean, it came out because after I got my PhD, a lot of my friends had been successful in tech. But I was pretty obsessed with working on theoretical physics on my own. So I just went to my rich friends and crashed in their guest bedrooms, guest cottages. So I'd stay with my friends, and that was great that they were able to provide that for me. And when you're staying in somebody else's house, it's very low stress, right? You don't have to worry about it as much. You're not living in your to-do list the way if you're living in your own house. And I was able to get a lot done that way. So 10 years later, I had some resources built up. My investors had done pretty well. I had even invested in some Netflix stock, which had done well.
Still doing very well.
And I was able to buy a property in Maui and turn that into a science hostel, and that way host other scientists who are coming through.
Amazing. We'll have to visit sometime.
Come
on. You just got some new land for that, right?
I did, yes. So I got a hold of a beautiful 15-acre piece of land in Maui. Now I have to figure out how to get the money and build on it.
Cool. Folks listening.
Maybe we can help with that.
That'd be fantastic.
Help build the next generation science hostel.
So basically what I want to do is I want to double at every iteration. So right now I've got about... you're going to Grey Goo us. I've got about four guest bedrooms in the current iteration of PSI, and want to go up to around 8 or so in the next version, and then 16 or so after that.
Oh yeah,
because that way you really control the steps of growth, and you know how to curate it and grow it in a healthy way.
Yeah. We talk about like nucleation and seeding, and it's sort of like you want to infuse whatever you're building. The initial conditions are so important to get right.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, one of the things you just mentioned was this notion of the difficulty of really tracking the value of these scientific contributions, or scientists not reaping the rewards of what they're actually.
Yeah, capitalism just isn't
injecting
designed to
into
reward scientific research that way.
Right.
And that's interesting from the perspective of, we're looking at that along a lot of other dimensions, not just science, but also, like, for example, teachers have a similar problem, right? Teachers encode, they build brains. Teachers build brains, and then brains build the world. Yet all the value built by the brains the teachers created doesn't make its way back frequently to the teachers. Nope. And part of that's because we don't encode it. And so we're sitting here in Starfish Mission, which is, this epicenter of beginning to build this new blockchain oriented economy. Do you think that there's potential there to help maybe track more of the value in science? Have you thought about that at all?
Well, for teachers, certainly if people are willing to pay for better tutoring, right, that will directly compensate teachers, especially the best teachers, who are willing to put themselves out for private tutoring. I mean, when you live your life, you make your choices not only according to how much money you're going to get, like how greedy you are and how much you want to make, but also the benefit you're going to have on other people in society. And when you decide to be a teacher, you're really deciding to be a philanthropist with your own time. And you're choosing not to make as much money because you want to contribute to making kids' lives better. And teaching is a really satisfying position. So this capitalistically sort of makes sense. Is teachers are getting a lot of benefit psychologically from bettering kids' lives. That's very satisfying, and they're not getting paid as much. But if bettering kids' lives wasn't as much fun, you'd have to pay teachers more to do it. So capitalism does sort of work that way. Even though it would be nice if teachers were paid more. And so maybe what you want to do is you want to emphasize more the importance of teaching, and that way people will be more willing to pay him more. That'll raise it. For virtual economies and Bitcoin specifically, I do think that's going to have a big effect on the world. Bitcoin isn't anonymous; it's very non-anonymous. However, the connection, who's connected to the wallets, can be more anonymous.
Sure.
I do think that's going to, I think it's going to, it's had a lot of success already. And I think it's going to ramp up another few times.
Yeah.
So I'm still hodlering.
I'm right there with you. I think it's interesting. Also, when you bring up the idea of capitalism, we've been thinking and talking a lot about the idea of, it's this system. In a way, you can look at it as a sort of distributed computer. Like a marketplace is this sort of distributed computer where each transaction is kind of like a pointillist dot in the larger map of the economy. And as all the transactions unfold, you get an emergent image of the value landscape, right? And at least in the picture that I see, it seems like with our previous monetary systems, we were working with maybe just grayscale. Yet in this new world of adding a much more rich and robust network of cryptocurrencies, we might be adding, a color, a full color set to that pointillist calculator, and therefore perhaps extracting or maybe better mapping the types of value that
we have
adds.
A rainbow of currencies now.
Yeah. And now, obviously, perhaps infinity is too much, but I think one is probably too few, and maybe we'll be able to better perhaps map the value of science or teaching, so that not only is it just philanthropy, but there's also a currency there, because there's already a social currency, right? But it's just not explicit.
The best things in my mind about cryptocurrency is there's less drag. So when you have a fiat currency, you're putting out US dollars. When you use those US dollars or you gain those US dollars, there are a bunch of things going on. One is you're taxed on your income, so you're paying a significant percentage back to government. Also, the government's printing the money. Okay, so it's deflating the currency just by printing more of it and releasing more of it to the banks. Okay, so it's losing value. It's having value sucked out of it at a constant and rather rapid rate. Okay, whereas when you invest in crypto, you're capped at 21 million Bitcoin. So you're gonna, it's a very limited resource. The problem with Bitcoin is there's also drag, which is you have to put a lot of electrical power into doing the computations to propagate the exchange of the currency. Okay, and people are very motivated to do that as the value of the currency increases. So it's a lot of power, and that's also a drag of sorts, but it's not drag that devalues the currency.
Yeah. And also the actual, it seems as if that use of energy creates a very real tie to human incentives. So you actually create within the system, because it requires real spending of money or time or energy to set up these mining rigs and actually procure the energy and potentially create innovative energy solutions around that. You're creating a massive alignment of many actors within a system, so that now you're actually building a much stronger inertia as opposed to like just a proof of work where you're trying to bootstrap something out of
securing
nothing.
the currency.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have the U.S. military, that backs the exchange of dollars. You have a bunch of guys with guns, right? But for Bitcoin, you don't have people with guns, but you can't take over the currency without extraordinary computational power.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if you ran into a few guns trying to invade a Chinese mining rig.
You can do it that way.
But your point is well taken.
That's not going to take over control of the whole system.
Certainly.
You can only do that if you have more than 51% of the mining power, and that's extraordinary now because so many people are mining.
Yeah.
Which is the way you want it to be.
Exactly.
It's a much better system. The exchange of Bitcoin needs to be faster. And handle larger volume, but I think that can be done with like the Lightning Network or other offshoots.
I'd be interested to get your take, like as a mathematician and physicist, about the structure of Tier 2 Lightning. Like from an evolutionary perspective, it seems like it makes a lot of sense to me.
It's going to have to happen.
Yeah, to have this separate layer of structure that can have a different topology, yet be connected to the core system, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, it seems natural, right? It seems like the right decision.
You have to have a subsystem where exchanges happen much faster, much higher volume, and for very small fees.
Yeah.
But then essentially, you're still trading BTC. You're just doing it off the main chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So,
it's weird that a physicist knows all this stuff.
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, I think it's perfect. We're having a synthesis of all the different factors.
No, the reason I know about this is because I'm also an investor and I've got to eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's how I fund the physics.
Yes, partially how we fund the podcast, right?
Good.
So we'll do another pivot here. Let's talk about bees. Let's talk about the beekeeping stuff. I know some of the things we talk about is, quite frequently a theme that comes up is, collective intelligence, trying to understand the role of communication. We are called catalyzing coherence. Obviously, this idea of coherence requires particular forms of coherent communication, right? And one of the propositions that we're putting forth is that, with the accelerating world today and all of these different fragmented perspectives, we're becoming in some ways less coherent as our own collective intelligence. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to find ways of helping establish flows of information and conversations across these otherwise separated parts of our system. And, what can we learn from these other types of collective intelligences of the world? Like, and also just like, what's it like being a beekeeper? What got you interested in that? Because that's just fun to talk about too.
So there are a bunch of things to unpack there.
Yes.
For the bees themselves, I mean, one thing we can learn is from the ways bees communicate. If a bee finds a nice stash of pollen, it comes back and it does a little dance.
Mm-hmm. The waggle dance.
Yeah. It's like a little infinity symbol with the center of the infinity pointing towards the food source. Mm-hmm. And with how far it is, and it communicates that to the bees around it in the hive.
Yeah.
So that sort of individual communication among the members that then spreads throughout the hive. That's very ususeful.
Yeah. Do they replicate the waggle as one does it? And is that how it propagates, or is it like a vibrational propagation?
No, I think they all. I think the bees come and actually physically touch the bee that's doing the dance and get the information from that, and then they fly off and go.
Okay.
I don't think it propagates throughout the hive.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't know enough about bee communication. No. I haven't taken my hive apart and looked. Excuse me, ladies. What are you actually doing in there? No, I mostly try to leave them alone. They like their privacy.
Yeah.
They're not crazy when I steal their honey either. But for humans, actually, what we have now is we have more interpersonal connectivity. Mm-hmm. So it used to be humans used to be more like bees. Mm-hmm. It used to be more that we'd only interact with the humans that were next to us.
Yeah. You have to see the waggle dance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now our dance is getting broadcast to the whole rest of the hive.
Exactly.
All right?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this, like, if you look at evolutionary structures, like us or any other animal, like we're this delicate balance of multiple layers of complexity, and a lot of animals had to die to figure out what that balance was like. Yeah. And what would happen if you connected all of the neurons together at once? Like you'd have a seizure and then die. And it's like the internet was kind of like that for humanity. In a way.
So that's a great analogy. So it's. I mean, if you talk to people like John Lanier, they'll tell you that's like with this incredible, complex interconnection of now all beings. Yeah. We're getting flooded with so much information that we can't process it. We're no longer productively interacting. Our productivity is going to go to zero. Our psychological health is going to go to zero. Yeah. And us as a society are having a seizure and dying.
And economic actors have learned how to exploit it as well, right? Yeah. To actually like look at our behavioral psychology, look at the way that we are potentially vulnerable to this overwhelm of signals, and then use that to further polarize or further drive us apart, such that we are giving our attention at the cost of our sanity.
Well, that's the worst part of capitalism. The best part, I mean, capitalism is like, you give people what they want, and you get money, benefit from it. It's like, this is great, sign me up.
The distributed computer part is pretty cool.
But people are working on the wrong side.
Yeah.
People aren't working on giving you what you want. People are working on manipulating you and changing what you want so you'll want their shit.
Right.
Yeah.
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 That's the bad part of capitalism.
Where
the subtle
incentives are not
coercion.
aligned.
Yeah.
It's a principal agent problem.
Yeah, you can win at capitalism doing either of those approaches, and often the evil one is easier.
Yeah.
It makes you more money.
Yeah, it's far easier.
Which is largely stems from this sense, and I mean, this is to actually challenge capitalism or the model in the sense of like everyone's coming to the marketplace right now competing over what is perceived as limited resources and goods. Right? This model was built at a time when not everyone had access to what we have today. And so when we think about a new model, we can think about what does that look like in a world of a potential abundance. And that's what's interesting to us when we think about new forms of capitalism or economic systems, how they can be so coherent that everyone enters this new space of interaction to the benefit of everyone, or in the spirit of, I am here to be an active participant of this network.
Yeah, like maximizing the positive some interactions in the world.
Yeah, and it's going to be a gradual transition in our society, and we're seeing this happen now. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's happening is automation is taking over much of human productivity. So things are becoming less expensive and more abundant. Mm-hmm. At the same time, people are losing their jobs. It's harder to find productive work. Mm-hmm. The healthiest way to deal with this is to have a more distribution of wealth equally, and something like universal basic income. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm saying this even though I'm mostly a libertarian, because I want the world around me to be better. Mm-hmm. I don't want people starving on the streets around me. Mm-hmm. So I want this minimum level of support for everybody around me, so it's a better environment, just for my own selfish reasons.
Sure, I feel the same way.
And at the same time, what people will find is if people can't find productive, rewarding work, what do you do in life?
Right.
Well, I've tried to spearhead that by you go surf, you go build cool projects, you run a nice nonprofit,
definitely.
And you try to benefit humanity as best you can, even if you're not doing it for money.
Yeah. The goal should be to teach people how to fish, right? Like this UBI, whatever the system looks like, it's a means through which people can learn how to fish, how they can live their lives in such a way they can rejoin the economy when they're ready.
Yeah. But you don't even have to do anything as productive as fishing. You want to find satisfaction in something that benefits you, your health wise, and hopefully benefits others too.
Yes.
Even though it's the robots doing all the work, making the money, and putting stuff on it.
I mean, that is something that we're considering now. Is like now we have all these automated opportunities for the system. Now we're sort of getting out onto the frontiers of economic theory. But
the other direction is the way I ended up getting into farming.
Yeah.
Is I kept improving my quality of life.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, great. I can have enough resources. I can go buy money now. Mm-hmm. Go buy groceries now, and and that's great. But no matter what your grocery store is, you can't get an egg that's as good as it is when it's still warm from coming out of the chicken.
Yeah.
Right. So now I've got a bunch of chickens in my backyard. I've got bees which produce honey when I want it, and it's great. I've got some permaculture gardening going on my lawn with garden beds and things setting up and propagating. I've got a bunch of avocado trees with avocados hanging off of them. and that purely comes from I mean, I'm not selling these things. It's not capitalist.
Right.
It's just improving quality of life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And it turns out that work in the dirt is a good way of improving your own quality of life.
Yeah.
If you've got a nice permaculture food forest going and you're maintaining it and you're doing the work, it's very satisfying.
Yeah.
It's satisfying in a similar way that teaching kids is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's like that high level satisfaction when you see the long term fruits of the labor, or actually literally eating the fruits.
Yeah.
But there's also that element of deep, just visceral satisfaction that is so absent with most of our highly abstract work in the 21st century, of just actually like being in the dirt or doing something with a living organism.
Yeah. You want the automation to free you up to embrace your humanity and spend your time doing things that bring you the greatest satisfaction and enjoyment.
Right.
And you don't want to be depressed that you don't have a job that's earning you a lot of money and producing a lot of stuff. You want to spend your time doing stuff that enriches your life either more directly or even in helping others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of society we want to transition into.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to do all my investments that I tried to transition to that early on.
Mm-hmm.
And, I spent a lot of my time surfing and kiting and playing paragliding. And it's just freaking fantastic. And I have a very high life satisfaction, and I'm never freaking depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm among my smart friends, I'm considered the freak because I'm smart, but I'm happy.
Yeah. Because you're not spending like all the time in a little box, just like working the models and kind of going through the steps.
It was the funniest thing. I mean, I delivered a virtual talk to an audience in Moscow.
Cool.
And
they're known for their like avocados, right?
and they astutely listened to my talk, and it was a physics talk, and it was to a fairly technical audience. And there was some discussion among the audience in Russian after the talk, and they talked to the translator, and the translator had been translating my talk to them. And there was one question that came back, and it had a very large amount of audience interest. And the translator gave it to me, and the question was, "Why are you so happy?"
Love it.
Yeah, that's funny. That's also kind of in their culture as well, right? Where they have this very
and also it's in the culture that if you're a very bright, intelligent person, you're a very hard-working person.
Yeah. You're very serious.
And you're extremely serious.
Yeah.
And you're not a huge happy goofball. Yeah. Which is a much better way to go through.
These things are not mutually exclusive, as it turns out.
Yeah, it turns out.
Which is good that we're breaking some of those molds.
Yeah, no, it turns out happy isn't dumb.
Definitely. Yeah, so let's dig into another interesting topic here. So psychedelics are something that we have talked a bit about with another one of our guests. Andres Gomez Emelson is a researcher who talks a lot about the geometry of psychedelic experiences as one of his interests. And given that you have this, you've been working a lot on geometric theories of physics, I'd be interested in getting your take on something. So I noticed when I was watching one of Clea Irwin's videos that he talked about his theory of curvature being a function of projecting higher dimensional shapes into these lower dimensions, and there's an interference that happens there, and then this kind of gives rise to this type of curvature in his mind, which seemed quite similar to something Andreas was talking about in terms of when one takes DMT, there's this element of kind of perceptual dilation, so to speak. So you're getting more frames basically kind of shoved into the moment of consciousness. So, and in his mind, that blows out the geometry into something more hyperbolic in our subjective experience. So I'm curious what you think about like those models or that idea, or generally also the kind of the idea of psychedelics as something perhaps either changing our subjective experience of reality or allowing us to see some of these other deeper symmetries or geometries in the world. Like where are you at on that?
Well, using psychedelics has been very useful to artists throughout history. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly a way of heightening and sort of scrambling your connections to perceived reality, and sort of in a way sort of opening up your consciousness to new and different experiences and new and different ways of looking at things. Personally, I've never done them. Mm-hmm. So personally, I use my brain as a very fine tool, and I really enjoy my connection to reality, and I don't want to mess with it, and I don't want to do anything that puts it at risk of being messed with. So I like having a very clear and firm grip on reality. And I guess I'm a mental control freak that way. I don't want to give up control of my own consciousness to some drug that's going to put it into some weird tailspin, even if it opens up new horizons to me. Because I like being a pretty creative individual. So it's kind of tempting to like mess with acid or something that's going to open up and provide you more creative influence. However, working with mathematics demands an extraordinary level of rigor. And you don't want to take some acid trip that's going to make you think that negative signs are plus signs that have stopped rotating for the rest of your life. You really want to maintain the ability to do mathematics and
Sure.
do higher logical functions. So for that reason, I haven't messed with this stuff myself. Also on the geometric side, certainly when you put that sort of when you put some chemicals into your brain that scrambles things and puts together new connections, you're going to have all sorts of new and wild perceptions about the world. And I can show you my inbox how many emails I have about people who have seen geometric figures while they're on acid and like wild geometric mandalas that and it seems pretty pervasive.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm such a staunch scientist that I think these things are probably just mental side effects of scrambling your neurons up with
Why
chemicals.
not actually access to a deeper archetypal structure of reality?
Because we don't access high energy particle physics with our brains. We access that level of energy with particle accelerators.
But isn't our neurons or other cells still operating through the same underlying framework?
Nope.
Where's that line?
That line is there are not strange quarks and top quarks and tau particles. None of those are being produced in your brain. None of them.
So from the perspective of if we are like going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, if we are in this settled lower energy residual state, so to speak, and everything that we are at the tip of the evolutionary process is a downstream function of that process. Is there any way, I mean, I know in some of those videos, in the QGR videos that they've created, they have this notion of these quasi-crystals and then projecting to lower dimensions, yet the higher dimensional information is recoverable, as they put it.
Right.
And so maybe there would be an idea of connecting these dots where it's like, is there a fingerprint in our evolutionary nature or our psychology of that? And that might be something that when we have a psychedelic experience, it changes perceptions to perceive that fingerprint,
right?
As opposed to the external world.
It might be putting you in touch with aspects of reality that you were not previously aware of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But those aspects of reality are going to be in the complexity of experience on this energy level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, so when you're interacting as human beings,
otherwise it probably would be very good for your brain.
No, you really don't want to bombard your brain with high energy particles.
Cosmic rays
really
are
don't
bad
want to do that. Whatever our human experiences are, even and when we take psychedelic substances, as far as I know from what I understand, having never done it, the effects are to sort of heighten your awareness and put you more in beginner mind of experiencing reality around you, where it doesn't go through the same trained neural net that's been through 100 times and which is able to predict everything that's going to happen. It's hitting sort of more exposed consciousness. Okay. However, this does not provide you like vision into another deeper realm. It just provides you a different view of what your senses are giving you currently.
Yeah, like you might be like orbiting a different attractor of consciousness.
Yeah, so it does affect your consciousness, but you're seeing the same photons, and you're interacting with the same up and down quarks and electrons. and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about this interpretation? If you look at evolution as an accumulation in many ways of like a perceptual, like adding more and more layers of filtering to like whatever the raw potential of perception would be. So that would make us like many layers deep in terms of this like stack of filters. I kind of look at it like evolution has put us on top of a high wire with a gyroscope, but we don't know the gyroscope's there because it, goes very deep in our history.
Yeah. We have, our whole metabolic system seems to exist to support our conscious.
Yeah. And then then perhaps you take the psychedelics and it kind of blows away. Like you realize you're back on that high wire. You're like actually like, oh shit, like,
that sounds like a bad trip. Yeah, but it's our consciousness exists on this extraordinarily wonderful and self-interacting physical substrate of our brains with all interacting neurons and stuff, and our consciousness exists as the functioning of that brain. But it feels to us like it exists independently. But if you do anything to mess with that substrate, it has a direct effect on consciousness. Okay, and to some degree, consciousness can affect, the operation of our brain and also, of course, our bodies.
Yeah.
But that's not through any mystical way. It's just through our normal, physical channels. But you can't have access to other realms of existence just through consciousness, and you don't have. There's nothing you can do to manipulate matter on a higher energy level. Other than the energy level we have access to without big machines.
Yeah.
Okay. So as human beings, we're going to communicate by talking. We're going to communicate by vision, by seeing things, by touch, matter. But we're not going to communicate through some other mystical method that connects us all on some astral plane.
What about telepathy?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Telepathy can't work.
No, there's no channel for it.
But
and if there was, scientists would have found it.
Well, isn't there a non-locality to all the particles of the universe? There under one interpretation of quantum mechanics, there's a non-local activity, which is collapse of the wave function, which is you have this spreading out of all different possibilities, and but you only experience one. Now, under the collapse interpretation of quantum mechanics, what happens is that whole wave function that's spread out over a huge distance collapses to just one place, and that's very non-local. Okay? But under the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that's not what happens. What happens is there are many of yous that have branched out and are experiencing each of the others too, and there is no collapse. Ever. Yeah. Well,
it's just an infinite spreading out.
So the infinite spreading out precludes the ability of non-locality to.
Yeah, you don't need non-locality.
Meaningful.
Every interaction that happens is a local interaction. So if you're interacting, something, whether it be light or sound or touch or wind, has to travel from one place to the other and interact locally here, then propagate, then interact over there.
Does that interpretation also preclude the relevance of any quantum effects within the brain giving rise to consciousness?
Well,
in your mind?
I used to strictly think that it did. However, because what happens is to maintain quantum coherence, right? You have to have an entanglement between two very small objects. And if too many other things bang on those objects, like collide with them, then those objects will be correlated with the others. And once they're correlated, they don't interfere. You have to have a coherent dance for these two to interfere with one another and to affect one another. And once you're correlated with too many other things through interactions, they no longer interfere. They no longer affect one another. This is called decoherence. Now, in the brain, it's pretty warm and wet in there and gooey. So anything that's going on that's in a quantum state, something else slithers by it and bangs into it and warms it up, and it immediately decoheres. So there's nothing in the brain that's where you can maintain quantum states and do quantum computations, except it's not incredibly implausible that if you have interactions between nuclear spins within molecules, that you could set up some quantum interactions between nuclear spins because they're protected by their electron clouds. And even if things are banging into them, they're banging into the electrons, and they don't affect the nuclei, which are isolated. So it's not absolutely impossible that there's some quantum phenomenon in the brain, but it seems extremely unlikely because it's too warm and wet, unless there's something really tricky going on. And also,
warm and wet. Not to interrupt you, but like, so when we're trying to build quantum computers, they're often building it in very cold environments,
cold and dry.
Yeah.
Yep. And
they're working on raising that temperature, right, or establishing higher amounts of quantum coherence at higher temperatures,
and doing error correction.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of tricks to try to get quantum computers bigger and more functional. I really hope that the brain is not doing quantum computations. And I hope the brain is doing just exchange along axions and dendrites for neurons, and the thoughts and our consciousnesses are embedded in that.
For replication purposes?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because I'd love to live long enough to get scanned and have that scan of my neural connections actually capture me. Yeah.
So what is how do you view consciousness?
I view consciousness as the it's sort of the verb that describes what brains do.
Well, so where's your line, and what is a brain? Like, is it? It's like turtles all the way down. Maybe you've heard.
Yeah,
that?
well, a brain comes from many emergent layers of interacting things. It's a brain is billions and billions of neurons interconnected with a high degree of interconnectivity between the neurons, and that interconnectivity is changes and is trained by interaction with the environment through our senses. And the functioning of that brain allows us as conscious beings to perceive things, and that perception happens as an action of our firings between neurons in our brain.
Yeah,
and we can track that down. Those neurons are cells with their own behaviors between neighbors, and this behavior and this emergence of consciousness and the ability to model reality has evolved over billions of years. And produced our amazing experience of consciousness as it is.
Yeah,
it's pretty fantastic and kind of bizarre, but it's
very bizarre,
and it's done it in such a way
bizarre.
that, I mean, it feels like there's a hard split between our conscious awareness and the behavior of the physical substrate, the behavior of our minds and of our brains and our bodies, but there isn't. If you do something to mess with your body, it'll totally change your thoughts.
Yeah, the symmetry's there.
Yeah.
So back to the scanning. I want to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird.
Well, I mean, we met at Ephemeral, so it doesn't entirely surprise me. I also spent a great deal of time thinking about these types of things earlier in my life as well. And tell me what you think about this, because the only type of, I guess, uploading procedure that I could ever feel comfortable with in terms of feeling as if I hadn't died was kind of like the ship of Theseus process, right? Which is so like the ship of Theseus, for anyone who's not familiar, is there's a ship and the ship is disassembling itself, and the pieces are floating back to another ship, which is reassembling the same ship. Is it the same ship? Is it a different ship? Right? And it's like, assuming we had the resolution problem solved, and assuming we knew that the fidelity was not lost, that process of being able to simultaneously shut down incrementally parts of my own mind as I was being leveled up, so to speak, in the actual virtual machine, and there was that continuity of my perceptual reality maintained, like while I was awake. And I can't necessarily prove that, but it's just like that seems like what I would feel comfortable with, and like actually feel like I would wake up as, or I would be me, because I wasn't even waking up as me. I just
but you'd wake up and you'd look down and there's your disassembled version.
The old meat package, right?
That's a little unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah, no, quite sure.
but you never. So it kind of squicks me out, the idea of destructively copying yourself.
Yeah.
Of you make a copy, and that copy involves destroying the original.
Yeah.
But the copy thinks it's you.
Yeah.
Right. But that copy's not a zombie. It is you. It's just another copy, and it's the reason it's so freaking weird is we're not used to making copies of ourselves.
Yeah. But you wouldn't care about the continuity element.
No, I care. It makes me feel weird, but rationally, when I think about it, it has to work.
What has to work exactly?
There's nothing. I mean, if you destroy one version of yourself,
Yeah.
And you make 3 different copies, and maybe one of those isn't viable, so it gets shot in the head. But the other 2 are good.
Yeah.
Now there are 2 U's.
But even with the many worlds interpretation of that infinitely bifurcating fractal, there's a continuity between the infinitely expanding paths, right? It's not as if it's discontinuous.
Well, Matt, have you ever been put under general anesthesia?
Yes, and this is why I say I can't logically prove, because like even when I go to bed, right, technically my consciousness is
well,
out.
you're still sort of dreaming, your brain's still doing stuff. But when you're under global anesthetic, you're out. Your consciousness is gone.
Yeah. And it was very strange waking up from
and you
global
wake up
anesthetic.
and it's like, whoa, I've jumped forward in time.
Yeah.
It would be like that.
It
We're not.
It would be like that for the thing that wakes up.
Continuity of consciousness is not necessary.
Yeah, it's certainly not necessarily for the thing that wakes up to believe it's you.
Yeah, and I think you're the same person who went under.
Yeah. No, and this is why I say, like, I get the rational arguments for it, for the fact that, like, that destructive copying is fine, and you can't logically prove there's a difference from the perspective of what wakes up.
Emotionally?
But from the perspective of me going into the process, I would much rather have the continuity if possible.
That's because the you going into the process is going to die.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And emotionally, that's not comfortable to deal with.
But the continuity at least provides the illusion of a non-death, perhaps.
Yeah. But the thing about death is that's I don't want to say comforting, but you never experience being dead.
Sure.
So it's not like I'm dead, I'm in a black room now, I'm just experiencing being in a black room. No, you're not experiencing anything. You're dead. You have no more perceptions. You have no perception of the passage of time. You have no perception of anything. You no longer exist when you're dead. So I try to, convince myself that for that reason, death is not a thing to fear to an extraordinary degree, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're not going to experience it's you're going to be gone, but you're not going to experience being dead. So it's not horrific, right? But
it's a shortening of life.
Yeah, I do feel a deep sadness at not being able to experience the future.
Yeah.
That bums me out.
You should look at reincarnation. It's another option.
I love the idea, but there's no viable physical pathway
it's
for it.
It's not falsifiable.
Yeah, it's not falsifiable. There's nothing to support it that exists.
Yeah, it's one of those big paradoxes. Could never fully know. Or could we? Or could spirits come to us?
By what channel? So the thing is, we know. I mean, we know how physics works between the interaction of subatomic particles all the way up to black holes. Mm-hmm. We don't know what happens with subatomic black holes. All right, but
yeah. Well, and this goes back to
the only physics we don't know.
This goes back to like the hardcore Platonist in you, right? Because you're like, it seems like you're definitely on the side of, we are discovering abstractions or things that exist out there, as opposed to the models we have are an incrementally refined set of symmetries being laid atop something that is more unknown.
Yeah, I think mathematics has that sort of ideal independent existence, and our universe is a physical manifestation of it. It's mathematics come to life. And we have, through science and physics specifically, we've come to understand to a very high degree of precision what all those allowed interactions are and how to model them. And we've been really successful. And to some people that like sucks a lot of the mystery out of life. It's like, religion, gods, supernatural.
What if it doesn't
qualities?
suck out the mystery as much as it doesn't include what can be felt as this inherent mystery that you can discern the more you look at it? In the same way that scientists, they discern more of the patterns in nature by looking at it, that the spiritualist is just doing that in their own sort of lens, their own reality tunnel.
And spiritualists often find, the scientific point of view discouraging.
Not necessarily.
Oh, good. I consider science to be wonderfully rich.
Indeed.
And it's just full of wonderful things that aren't known.
Yeah.
And tools for exploring those things.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. And it also provides a very rich description of reality. It allows for incredibly complex human interactions and how to describe them and deal with them. But does say, yeah, no, certain things just don't happen. Like you don't have ESP, you don't have telepathy, you don't have the influence of gods in our reality. You don't have all these things because it doesn't make physical sense. It's not consistent with the laws of physics. It can't happen.
Well, they say God is in the gaps, and there's certainly some gaps.
No, where are the gaps, man?
What with all the particles that we don't even, the dark energy, dark matter, all these things that like we don't have a full sense of yet.
But it's not this hand of some big bearded guy in a cloud coming down and making galaxies spin faster.
Of course not.
It's gonna be some other few massive particles that'll fit into the paradigm just fine.
So I think one interesting way of bridging that conversation is thinking about science is in many ways a tool for describing the objective, the shared experience, right? The things that we can understand and measure using a particular set of tools, but either we have not yet developed scientific tools, or science might just not be the right tool for approaching the subjective.
Yeah, that we don't have the right detectors yet.
Yeah, like what is the science of the subjective, right? Yeah. Because it's like, as soon as we start applying statistics, right? Like there's this idea of you can have 100 marbles, the average weight 8.5 grams, and no marble 8.5 grams, and in a way, therefore, the most real aspect of reality is its deviation from that abstraction of 8.5 grams, not the abstraction.
There are levels of reality, underlying ours, that we don't have access to yet.
Yeah.
Well, below and above, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, to access things, you just need better detectors acting on those levels, and those things that act on those levels, they don't interact with our level.
So one thing I'll say is maybe consciousness is one such detector, and that something like ayahuasca is a tool for consciousness to perceive things in the same way that a microscope is.
I think it's a different thing. I think it's just scrambling a bunch of neurons in internal biochemistry.
Okay. The other question I had for you was I'd love for you to touch on Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Sure.
And how that relates, because math being this underlying code for all of the cosmos. What is the incompleteness theorem? How does it speak to your map of the world?
Well, I'd love to demonstrate Gödelian incompleteness, but I can't address it because if I do, this would be a completed discussion. So I'm forbidden from addressing it.
It's like the Tao, which can be named as not the real Tao.
Yeah, so Gödelian incompleteness is based on self-reference.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the paradox is inherent in self-reference.
Yeah.
Now, the specific self-reference in Gödelian incompleteness is that if you have a sufficiently complicated mathematical system, and it doesn't have to be that complicated, you can have like the system of multiplication and addition, and referencing these operations.
Yep.
That there will be things within that system that are true, right? So they'll always be seen to be true.
Yeah.
And whenever you test them, but they're not provably true within the system.
So you have to pop out of the system.
Yeah. So for mathematical proof, you can if you set up a system of algebra, you can prove 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
Right. That's provably true. You can prove all sorts of things, and you can keep going with the proofs to higher and higher levels of abstraction. But according to Gödelian incompleteness, which is pretty wild, there will be things that are true, but you cannot prove them to be true. Okay, and this is often put forward as a reason why we can't fully understand the universe. But the thing is I'm a physicist. All I care about is what's true. I don't actually care what's provably true. I don't care what you can prove. I care what's actually true. So it doesn't bother me that much. If I can find a true description of our universe using mathematics, that's good enough for me.
Well, how would you discern that then? How would you identify something as true but not prove? So empirically but not mathematically true.
You see that it matches up to all our experimental tests.
Which is what then is kind of like it's an indicator that one needs to kind of create a meta system to encapsulate the potential for proof for that new observation.
Well, no, there will be some things that within your system that you cannot prove, even if they're true.
Yeah.
But I don't really care.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't care about proofs that much. I like that they exist for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But no, this is why I'm not a mathematician.
Are you familiar with Buckminster Fuller's work much?
Sure. Yeah, he's great.
Kind of similar in ways, I feel like. Interesting to explore. We're doing some work.
Even weirder guy than me.
Yeah. He was certainly eccentric. Yeah.
He designed a really terrible car. The Dymaxion car is really bad.
I mean, it was, he had a voluminous body of work, so not all of it necessarily ages. He was experimenting with some interesting design ideas and principles for sure.
No, I've built some terrible stuff too.
Yeah. That's how we build good things eventually, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I think it's coming up on about that time. I think you have some places to be. Thank you so much again, Garrett, for coming on the show. We really loved having you. I know I have a lot to think about after this conversation.
Well, I hope you won't do it under the influence of acid. So.
No, not this time.
All right. Although a lot of people think that helps. I'm just not convinced.
Fair enough. If you had the deal placed before you, if you had the deal with the devil, where if you had a tab of acid and you were guaranteed to solve the E8 Lie group issues with the grand unified theory,
if I actually was guaranteed to actually know what precisely what the underlying geometry of our universe was, I'd do it.
Well, the DNA helix, right? There was part of that. There's been some help in those regards.
This is not an excuse for my friends to try to dose me without my knowledge.
And then take credit.
I think I'm much more likely to make progress on it without the drugs.
Well, we salute you in those endeavors.
And somebody's got to be the control in this experiment.
For sure. Yeah.
Totally.
And we wish you the best of luck in both the physics and the control group.
Yeah. Matt, Brian, it's been great talking with you.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Garrett.
All right.